with the region.
All right. That was Anne Waiguru not too long ago.
That was in February after the
BBI,
the county assemblies
passed the BBI.
Yeah. I heard
which was surprising.
They called it Super Tuesday or something like that.
Which was surprising to many people, because at that point it was said that the Mount Kenya region was solidly opposed to the BBI. I mean, basically because the DP enjoyed considerable support there, and the DP had expressed, open opposition to this BBI thing. So Waiguru there making a point that the region voted for BBI, and in a sense, it was interesting to hear her say that, and considering that that was a surprise vote. Linus.
Right, Joe. Let's go again to it's a series of events around the passage of BBI, and remember at the time BBI didn't look like a possibility. We sat here one night, I think, analyzing how the vote was coming in, and we were all surprised by the turn of events, that it ended up being only Baringo County that on the night voted against BBI. But let's just listen to Waiguru speaking in 22 about Azimio la Umoja somewhere in Nakuru.
The Right Honorable Prime Minister akisimama tu hivi peke yake, 40% of the country iko locked. Hata hajaangalia hata deputy ni wa kutoka upande gani. Kumwongezea tu ni kumjazia. Wengine bado wanatafuta.
There are difficult things that politicians live and sleep over, and most of those things would normally come from their own utterances. And I don't know how that endorsement sits tonight, akisimama tu, and that's without any defection. That's interesting. But again, it tells us about the impermanent nature of political alliances in this country. It's not, it's not fixed or cast in stone. But here is my reading, and I want to borrow from what Francis was saying earlier on the tough races within Kirinyaga itself. Could there be factors within Kirinyaga itself and also in the national politics that are informing what seems to be a trend of inconsistencies on the part of Anne Waiguru? It looks to me like she desperately wants to survive politically.
Yeah, and the forces that you talk about are the same forces that she accused of, one, sponsoring an impeachment against her, and number two, instigating prosecution or investigation, and now what we see is an imminent prosecution of corruption. I remember that event at ESCC, and we asked her what could be the problem, and she claimed that the ESCC summons and investigations are political, and they are driven politically because of her political stand. And this is what she had to say.
So harassment, it is intimidation, it is political, and they wanted this picture of you people here and me here because of politics. The same people who are behind my impeachment. It's because I hinted that I am reconsidering my position, and it's very unfortunate.
Do I need to remind you of that impeachment situation or story in Parliament? That time, it was shortly after the impeachment of Kiambu Governor Ferdinand Waitito. At that time, the contest in the Senate was whether to go plenary or committee. The plenary was then seen as a public butchering, you know, like a lynch mob of sort. And the committee was seen as the safe space, because the procedure in the impeachment process of a governor is that if the committee saves you, then there's very little business at the plenary. But if the committee confirms one or two charges, then you'll have to defend yourself in a plenary. So the safest route as it were, to save a governor who is facing impeachment would be at a committee level. Maybe you can play around with the game, you can play some games around with the committee. And so you remember that discussion. And not so long before, she had gone to Karen. And I remember when Raila Odinga went for the COVID test at Kemri, I remember asking him a question about it, and that time there was this claim of Mwosho Moja that she was going to Karen to
Capitol Hill
to be sanitized basically. And so how she also survived impeachment in the Senate at that time was a very political process. And remember that time, the people who were pro high impeachment were the opposite team.
Where she is.
Yeah, so it tells you that all these things are about one simple thing: interests. No permanent political enemies, no permanent political friends, only interests. And interest of a particular time as now. So today, I saw a post on Facebook and Twitter, and she was claiming the investigations. When the People Daily had a headline story today that she's likely to face prosecution, now she claimed that the reason why she was likely to be prosecuted was because of her decamping to UDA. Not forgetting that 5th of September last month, when she was at EACC, she had not joined UDA per se. So is it trying to play victims? Maybe. Would EACC be at the right place to take her to court if they get concurrence from the DPP? Very interesting. Why? Because you remember the precedent set by Justice Mumbi Ngugi. If a governor is taken to court for graft,
step aside.
The governor steps aside. So would that be the case? Maybe.
Interesting.
But Joe, let me just add to Francis's point on graft there and the impermanence of some of these positions, because with these new claims carried by the People's Daily that she was facing arrest, Kipchumba Murkomen, the senator for Elgeyo Marakwet, went on Twitter and said EACC will be committing a blunder of monumental proportion if they charge Anne Waiguru at this point in time in a desperate effort to force governors to support their project. What? If EACC continues to play politics instead of exercising their independence, they'll destroy themselves. But
that was not
during that time, in the heat of the NYS saga, I just want us to listen to what Murkomen had to say about Anne Waiguru.
I do not know whether one Waiguru is guilty, but the facts that have been presented on the table is enough for Anne Waiguru to stand trial and be charged in a court of law. If she is not going to be charged for the corruption of NYS, we could as well legalize corruption in this country. Kama Anne Waiguru atapelekwa kotini kwa maswali ya NYS, afadhali jameni tubadilishe sheria ikuwe wizi ni legal. So that kila mtu aibe yake kidogo kidogo.
Lakini internet inafaa kuwa illegal.
Here is a sad story about our politics. Our politics actually do remain the greatest hideout for wrongdoing. And I'm not suggesting any of the names we are talking about here are wrongdoers, but it seems to me it is a perfect place to hide because there'll be a political cover. So if there is a move to charge you, then it will be interpreted.
So we will never actually know what the truth is.
Yeah.
You'll never know what the truth is. And even for those convicted, you still find them actually talking about it is politics. It's not the law. It's not corruption. And that is the sad fate of corruption. And even the story of NYS really is getting into these problems because of politics.
And if politicians were ever to push for the banning of something, it probably would be cameras and the internet.
Yes.
Doesn't forget. But you see, Linus, what Linus is saying is profound. Why? Because if you're in political camp A and you're involved or you're suspected or you're accused of certain ills, you will be clean in that political team. But if you defect to the other team, you become, bad, and those issues come up. Because look at, for example, the the situation that we are addressing now. When Anne Waiguru was supporting the handshake team, all these corruption issues were not spoken about, loudly. But they have now been revived now that she has decamped to DP's side, and vice versa. So those who are good in political camp A will be bad when they move to political camp B. Those who are in political camp B will be good when they come to political side A. So that makes it very difficult, especially in the fight against corruption. Maybe if we were to divorce the political process from matters investigation, matters prosecution, matters accountability, maybe we would have a pathway. But is it possible to do that? I think that is ideal. Yeah. That is the ideal situation. Yeah. Kwa ground,
ladies and gentlemen, before we go, there's something that has been quite intriguing over the last few weeks. I mean, at some point, Francis, I don't know whether it was last month or the month before, we had the 3 MKs, Martha Karua, Moses Kuria, Mwangi Kiunjuri, all adding to this conversation that's happening in the Mount Kenya region. Because right now, Mount Kenya region, as many people have said, it's where everybody seems to be trooping back and forth. And they came up with the Mount Kenya Forum.
Unity Forum,
I think it was called. And it's quite unclear where they are now. You hosted Mwangi Kiunjuri the other day on Kererembi.
Yes.
And apparently, he said interesting things there.
Yeah, he was saying he's now neutral.
I don't know.
Sounded
that's
very
how it begins.
Yeah, I don't think these.
Waiguru started the same way. I'm neutral on neutral. BBI. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, neutral. And I asked a pointed question: is he moving to Raila Odinga's team from Deputy President's team? And he said, not the case, but he's observing the situation. And sounded very interesting. And the very same week, Moses Kuria releases opinion polls on the presidential race next year, and some interesting numbers. And I looked at the numbers, and I thought they were addressing 2 major constituencies. One, the Mount Kenya region, and number 2, Kalonzo Musyoka and Musalia Mudavadi. On one hand, giving Musalia all the Western Kenya votes, about 1.4 million or thereabout, and Kalonzo a similar number of votes, and showing that they wouldn't make a huge mark if they were to contest on their own. I thought I interpreted it as if he was sending a certain message to them that either you align with one of the main horses, as they are called, or your numbers will be insignificant politically. On the other hand, looking at the Mount Kenya vote, and I interpreted it to mean that regardless of how many votes you get in Mount Kenya region, they would not probably be enough. They would not be sufficient to handle the presidency. You need to work your math elsewhere in other regions. And I would also think it's an attempt to survive politically. Remember the tiff in UDA when they were claiming that there's a push for them to join UDA per se and not to remain in their political parties. On the other hand, you see, it's also a question of coalition building. I think we are heading to a season where one single political party may have a problem garnering as many parliamentary seats, gubernatorial seats, county assembly seats, and even the presidency without necessarily working with other people. And so I thought, and I still look at it as an attempt to push for recognition and for inclusion at the table when negotiations and decisions in relation to how the game plan for 2022 will look like will be called.
So it's not a done deal out there.
No, it's not a done deal. And we keep saying 10 months. Is it 10 months to the elections?
Now 9.5.
9.5. It will change. The way we act in this country is like elections is next month. And indication about mpaka August. And there are only these deadlines that have to be met before we get the process from nomination lists to deciding finally where you're going to end up, who the presidential candidates, the final ones will be. We still have the OKA out there. Not decided on what's going to happen next. We are hearing about Kalonzo Musyoka now and Raila Odinga maybe kwanza kufikiria mambo yao. Musalia Mudavadi is there. The KANU leader is also on the other side. There's Ford Kenya also on that side. So there are all these balls that are still in the air in terms of where they'll end up falling. We don't know. So I think tuangalie tu, tusubiri tu tuone kutaendaendaje. as we talk about voter registration, Joe. Kura zinapasa kupigwa. But the voter registration exercise is not going as planned, at least not for anyone. The numbers are disappointing, to say the least. And unless there's a miracle between today and Tuesday next week, we're not even going to get to half the number of about 6 million we're looking at, considering we've only registered about 800,000 new voters to date. A lot of reasons being given, from voter apathy to poor planning and mobilization to the youth not feeling that their voice really matters in this. To them, they're looking at the politicians, they're seeing the same old ones who they've been seeing throughout their lives with the same slogans, and they look at the, what did they say, the wisdom of hindsight, that nothing will change. Maybe that is what is influencing this, that young men and women are not coming out to register as voters.
And Yvonne, that's interesting, because it means that somehow the dynamics of the last general election come into play a lot more, because there was this idea that it is the younger voters, the ones who are coming onto the register for this election, who will kind of determine how this goes. But in a sense, they might not be such a significant number in the bigger scheme of things, in a sense, to say that the factors that influenced the last general election might be not too dissimilar to what then we see in 2022, because we don't have, you know, a whole ton of new voters joining the register. A very interesting phenomenon.
It is, and considering the fact that due to budget deficit, IBC is not going to be conducting another mass voter registration exercise unless funds are availed. And so that means the window is closing for those young people who would ordinarily be voting for the first time. It's fast closing, because it's this ends on Tuesday next week. And so, and for me, that's also part of the problem, is that IBC has consistently had budget deficits. I mean, you know, not just this election, but the previous one. And the model that we have depended on when it comes to voter registration has been to depend on the political players to actually mobilize voters and, you know, put out a lot of messaging to do with that. When we know that for them, of course, their interests are not necessarily for the public good. Most of their messaging will be, go out there, register to vote so that tutoe my opponent, and so that we can, you know, vote in a particular way. And so for me, that has just been one of the big things we've seen. And it's been a very muted messaging from the IEBC, which is responsible for voter education, you know, in this same manner. And so our structure is flawed. So it is this same politicians that we depend on to spend the money to do all of this voter mobilization, yet it is the same leaders who will deny IEBC the budgets that they require in Parliament. And so some of these things that you take a look at, you know, voter apathy is in some respects a factor of poor voter education. And by voter education, a lot of what we've seen with IBC has been typically go out there and register to vote. It is your right. You will decide the leaders who will do that. But how about trying to do this a little differently? Telling us this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to assure you of a free and fair process. This is the election process. This is who counts the votes. This is how they're counted. This is how they will be transmitted. This is how your vote will be secured. These are some of the lessons that we have learned from 2017 and 2013, basically being a little more proactive in their messaging and talking about the electoral process, because voter education in this country is go out and register to vote.
Right.
And in some instances, it almost feels like a threat. You know, like if you don't do this, then you get the leaders you deserve. Whereas probably assuring the voters who have seen what has happened with previous elections, they have seen the shenanigans that have happened previously. One of the questions you'd be asking yourself is, so why should I register to vote if my vote doesn't count? Where is IBC with that voter messaging? And yes, they have budget deficits, but there are a lot of things that they can do with their messaging that require no money. All of us on this table know how difficult it is to get IEBC officials to speak on a number of issues. Where are the commissioners? Where is the acting CEO to come here for an interview and say, okay, guys, so this is what we're doing. This is how we're managing things. So some of those things that we could learn from countries like Zambia that recently did, you know, a very serious voter registration, exercise. And we all saw the result of that with their election. So for me, it's just the way in which they do the messaging that needs to change, and this non-dependence on politicians who we all know have, a very partisan stake in people going out to register. So it's a thing about the system and, the way it is structured.
I think, sorry.
No, let's go.
Let's go with Linus first.
Okay. My view is, I think what we are seeing in these registration centers is a symptom of a greater problem, a much, much deeper problem about our country. Because when we look at new voter numbers, the assumption we should be making is these are young people who turned 18 and above, who have never voted before, that are now coming into the voters register. But when only 800,000 people out of a target of 4.5 million do register, and short of a miracle, the numbers will be less than 1 million by the end of the registration on the 4th, then we must ask ourselves greater questions. What could this be about? In my view, I think we are experiencing as a country a decline in civic engagement, a decline in civic awareness. Just basically that thing that tells you to participate in public affairs. We have a youth base that has been boxed into a very difficult situation. A youth base that is grappling with unemployment in a very, very bad way, in a very difficult economic situation. We have a youth base that has been condemned to hand-to-mouth survival. I mean, this country now has one of the largest populations of graduates that are walking about with degrees but no opportunity to work. What is this doing? What it's doing to our youth is it's killing their hopes. Yeah. It's taking away their faith in some of these processes. And then secondly, our politicking and our elections, basically, let's say our politics is built around elections. The period in between is just a waste of time because you don't really have anything going on that would inspire civic participation. And what you just have to use as a measure is just look at the number of people who take part in the so-called public participation forums. Yeah. It doesn't matter how much you advertise, whether on television or in print, very few people do turn up there. Because I think we are operating a broken system politically. Yeah. Like I said, we are a word-of-mouth democracy. If you were to remove the three political leaders, key political leaders in the country right now, and sorry if I left your name out there, that is Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, and Raila Odinga, there'll be a state of not knowing in this country. A lot of people who, and I hear the three of them talking about they're not looking for followers. I mean, what there is are their followers. We don't have anything else. We don't have followers of parties. We don't have believers in certain manifestos. Yeah. We have followers in individuals, and that's what we have. And I think the youth are having a problem with this kind of arrangement. The youth may be hoping for higher ideals, a better organized kind of system. Remember the youth we are talking about, these are the guys who tell you, send me a link. What is your WhatsApp? What's your handle? You know, it's about order. It's about a certain way of doing things. Yeah. Certainty. The kind of certainty that is not available in our politics right now. So here we are asking them to turn up in nondescript registration centers to take part in an election. They're not sure even
for what?
What is that is going to rally them? Is it about jobs? Is it about what exactly is going to make them line up and vote? So we are in the cusp of what I think a great problem. This decline in civic awareness is going to cost the country a lot. And the greater cost is a loss of an entire generation of youth. We may actually lose an entire generation because we have to keep the oldies around because there can't be a vacuum. But meantime, down here, we are having youth that have been broken. They are not inspired to join in the space because they are not in a physical and mental shape to do that. And there are no structures to actually support that. This thing of political parties in Kenya should really be taken seriously if we are going to organize ourselves as democracies. Because this spur of the moment organization around elections, I mean, UDA is such a new party, and be sure next year, when ODM and Jubilee finalize their marriage, there'll be another name there coming, you know, a few months to the election. And those are the things that we're supposed to rally us around and then form a government around that, dump that, form something else. I think for youth, and a majority of them can be very impatient with some of these things, we are going to lose them.
Wow, interesting.
Right.
Joe,
you need to have the last word.
Yes, and I look at it this way. Voter registration is a process. You require certain things for it to be successful. And one, you have to avail identity cards. Who avails the identity cards is the National Registration Bureau, the national government, so to say. And deliberately go out there and look for people who ought to be given these IDs so that they can register as voters. And the ones that are uncollected facilitate the owners to have these IDs brought to them in one way or another. So that then you can now move to the next level of registering them as voters. If you're to look at the trend, 400,000 in the first week and the second week, then 400,000, it will not surprise me if we get another 400,000. So by next week on Tuesday, it will be about maybe 1.2 million max at the close of it. So this only adds to the 19.6 million registered voters. So you will end up with a voter register of about 20.8 million before you clean it up. Does it change fundamentally from what we had in 2017? No, unless all these targeted voters register as voters. So then it leaves the political class to work with the numbers that are present. And when you work with the numbers that are present, you have to now deal with the dynamics as it were. Look at the, let's say for example, the 14 counties of Rift Valley, about 4.6 million voters as at 2017, Coast about 1.7 million, Northeastern about 500,000, what you call Upper Eastern, you know, Marsabit, Isiolo, about 220,000 or thereabout, Mount Kenya East, now that we came up with that, the dichotomy, Meru, Embu, Tharaka Nithi, about 1.2 million, Mount Kenya West, if you may like, Kiambu, Murang'a, Nyeri, about 2.9 million, Nairobi 2.2. So you're dealing with the same numbers that we had in 2017, only with an addition of about 1.2 million or thereabout. It's a good story there. An interesting one politically.
And I know
what we need to do now.
We need to take this home, yay. And we start with you, Joe.
Now, this weekend, all roads, as it were, will be leading to the Scottish port city of Glasgow. Famed for its Victorian and Art Nouveau